What happens when a flight attendant questions a quiet man's right to wear a simple cross around his neck, without realizing that man is Keanu Reeves? What began as a subtle act of judgment over a silver crucifix turned into a powerful moment that would shake an entire flight. And by the time they landed, no one would forget what he said, or how he said it. Oh, and before we take off, tell us, where are you reading this from? We love seeing your reactions. The main hall of Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with its usual chaos. People rushed in every direction. Children pulled colorful rolling bags. Executives typed furiously on their smartphones while glancing at flight boards. Amid that frantic crowd, one man walked at a steady, almost unbothered pace. He wore a plain black t-shirt, worn-out jeans, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. No designer watch, no flashy accessories, no security entourage clearing the path. It was Keanu Reeves. A few people gave him curious glances, uncertain. Could it be? Seemed to flicker in their eyes. But most didn't recognize him. He passed by like any other traveler, maybe even one who seemed slightly out of place in such a polished environment. One detail, however, stood out from his understated look. Around his neck, hanging loosely, a small silver crucifix glinted gently under the airport lights. It wasn't large or flashy, but it had presence. There was something about that piece, something heavier than its size. Keanu moved forward without arrogance, without hiding, just being himself. When he reached the first-class gate, he stepped into the priority line, handed his ticket to the flight attendant on duty. His name was printed clearly on the boarding pass, but the woman in front of him, polished posture, perfect uniform, sharp gaze, hesitated for a second. Sir," she looked at the ticket, then back at him, her brow slightly furrowed. "I think you're at the wrong gate. This line is for first class." Keanu didn't look surprised or offended. He simply replied with a calm smile, "I'm at the right gate." The attendant, identified by her name tag as Carla, checked the ticket again. It was legitimate. The name was correct. She knew who Keanu Reeves was, of course, but she hadn't recognized him at first. His casual appearance, the worn sneakers, the complete lack of celebrity aura, it didn't match the profile she was used to seeing in first class. Even after confirming his identity, she hesitated. The silent bias had already surfaced. She let him pass, but her eyes followed him with unease. He walked slowly down the corridor and settled into his first-class seat with ease, like someone who had done this many times before. But Carla kept watching. There was something about him that bothered her. Maybe it was the contrast, the simplicity where she expected extravagance, or maybe it was the necklace, the crucifix, now fully visible as he adjusted his seatbelt. She froze for a moment. Her gaze locked on the tiny symbol, and a flash of tension ran across her face. She said nothing, but took a step forward. Then another. She followed him down the aisle with firm, almost rehearsed steps. Her expression had changed, more tense, deliberate. Something inside her had shifted. She lets him board, but when she notices the crucifix on his chest, she suddenly freezes. Something shifts in her expression. She follows him to his seat with stiff, purposeful steps. The hum of the aircraft was almost therapeutic. As the plane climbed steadily into the sky, the world below became a blur of clouds and sun-glinted rooftops. Inside the first-class cabin, the air was conditioned and crisp. The lights dimmed just enough to suggest comfort without sleep. Keanu sat still in his seat, arms resting on the padded armrests, his breathing measured. He wasn't reading, wasn't watching anything. He was simply being. In the quiet, his presence drew more attention than noise ever could. The silver crucifix around his neck had shifted slightly during takeoff, now resting fully in view atop his plain black shirt. It wasn't bold, it wasn't polished to perfection. In fact, it looked slightly aged, worn at the edges, as if it had lived through decades of stories. And yet, that simple piece of metal carried more weight than most could imagine, Carla noticed. From the galley, she peeked into the aisle, just enough to keep an eye on him. Something about the way he sat there, so calm, so centered, so unapologetically himself. It made her uncomfortable. And yet, she couldn't explain why. She had dealt with celebrities before, loud ones, demanding ones, entitled ones. But Keanu didn't fit any of those molds. Still, there was something about him, or maybe about that necklace, that stirred a strange discomfort in her chest, one she didn't want to name. Moments later, she approached. Her posture was professional, calculated. She'd practiced that poise in front of mirrors, in training seminars, in her own mind every time she had to deal with situations. This wasn't just a flight, it was her domain, and she was determined to uphold its order. "Sir," she began, lowering her voice just slightly, "I'd like to remind you that we have certain policies regarding overt religious symbolism in shared spaces. Especially in this cabin, we ask for discretion." Keanu turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, is there a rule I've broken?" Her voice remained soft, but the undertone sharpened. "It's not about breaking rules, it's about creating a neutral environment. Some passengers might find certain symbols divisive." He looked down briefly at the crucifix. "I've flown like this many times before. No one's ever had an issue." She hesitated. That wasn't the response she expected. "Yes, well, times are changing. Some travelers feel more sensitive these days. We just ask everyone to be considerate. Perhaps you could tuck it in." Her hand gestured vaguely toward the necklace, like she didn't want to point directly, as if the symbol might burn her fingers. Keanu didn't react with anger, but he also didn't comply. "This crucifix isn't a fashion statement, it's not a provocation. It's part of who I am." Carla forced a smile, the kind used to diffuse, not to connect. "Of course, and we respect that. We simply ask that passengers keep personal expressions discreet, especially in premium cabins." Her words, dressed in policy, carried a passive-aggressive bite. The woman in the seat across the aisle looked up, subtly tuning in. A man 2 rows back removed one earbud. The air had changed. Something uncomfortable had started to bloom. Not loud, not chaotic, but palpable. Keanu's voice remained even, controlled. "With all respect, I believe I'm being singled out." Carla blinked. "Excuse me? If someone else wore a pendant of a tree, a star, or a stone, would you ask them to hide it?" She opened her mouth, closed it, reset. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Silence. She didn't answer. Instead, she cleared her throat, stepped back with a nod, and said, "I'll give you a moment." Keanu looked up again, slower this time. "This necklace has saved my life more than once. In war zones, in hospital rooms, in nights I thought I wouldn't wake from." His voice didn't rise, but it filled the space like thunder in a cathedral. "I won't hide it. Not now. Not ever." For the first time, Carla showed what she was feeling. Her frustration, her disbelief, it cracked through the plastic of her customer service expression. It was only a flicker, but it was there, and everyone saw it. Passengers turned. The energy shifted fully now, no longer uncertain. People began forming silent opinions. A man lifted his phone from his lap, pointed the camera discreetly toward the aisle. Another whispered to his partner, "Is that really Keanu Reeves?" But Keanu didn't notice the shift. He wasn't trying to create one. He was simply standing still, holding a boundary others thought soft. Carla, sensing the loss of control, straightened again. "If you refuse, I'll have to escalate this to the captain. You do what you need to do." His eyes met hers now with quiet strength. "But know this, the problem isn't what's on my chest. It's what's in your eyes." A silence so complete fell over the cabin. It might as well have been outer space. Even Nicole stepped back slightly. Even she felt it, not just the power of the words, but the truth in them. Carla opened her mouth and closed it again. She had nothing to say, and everyone knew it. Keanu says with firm calm, "This necklace has saved my life more than once, and I won't hide it." Carla's professional mask cracks, her irritation now fully visible. The plane had reached cruising altitude. Outside, clouds drifted in slow motion beneath the wings. Inside, the first-class cabin hummed with a quiet luxury. Reclining seats, champagne flutes, the occasional clinking of silverware. But one corner of the cabin buzzed with a different kind of energy, the aftershock of a confrontation no one had expected to witness. Keanu sat silently in his seat, unmoved. The crucifix still hung over his shirt, resting peacefully above his heart. Carla returned. Her steps, now quicker and more rigid, carried a new edge. She stopped beside his seat, lips tight, expression neutral, but this time there was no attempt to disguise the tension in her tone. "Sir, I've received a few comments from other passengers. Some are feeling uneasy." She spoke in that same carefully measured voice, the one that tried to sound objective, but couldn't quite hide its undertone. Keanu looked at her, calm. "About what?" Carla paused. The answer was obvious, but she hesitated to say it outright. "About the display of ideological symbols in a shared enclosed environment. We strive to maintain a space where everyone feels comfortable." Keanu didn't blink. "A symbol of faith makes people uncomfortable?" Carla took a breath, short, sharp. "Imagine if everyone began wearing political pins, religious signs, ideological slogans. It would create division in a space meant for unity." He leaned forward slightly, his voice still low, but now it carried a weight, a deliberate clarity. "Then maybe the problem isn't the symbol. Maybe it's what people have been taught to feel about it." His words echoed louder than his voice. A couple sitting nearby exchanged glances. The man subtly angled his phone, pressing the record button without drawing attention. Carla, noticing, straightened her posture, as if trying to regain authority through stature. "I'm simply following protocol. If you refuse to cooperate, I may have to notify security." Now that got attention. More heads turned. A quiet hush spread over the cabin, the kind that comes when something real, something raw, pierces through the surface of routine. But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he looked her in the eyes and said, "Call whoever you need to, but understand this. The problem isn't what's on my chest, it's what's in your eyes." Silence, total. Carla stared at him, caught in the sudden mirror he held up, not with judgment but with clarity. His words were not aggressive, they were true, and that made them harder to swallow. A flight attendant further back stopped mid-task. The couple continued to film. One or two passengers subtly nodded, though they said nothing. The divide was forming, but it wasn't between faiths or ideologies. It was between perception and reality. Carla backed away without a word, jaw clenched. She didn't know yet, but the tide had begun to turn. Keanu doesn't back down. "Call whoever you need, but know this. The problem isn't what's on my chest, it's what's in your eyes." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had changed. What began as subtle tension had turned into something heavier, more electric, the kind of unspoken shift that made people sit up straighter, whisper a little less, watch a little more closely. Keanu still sat quietly in his seat, his silver crucifix resting on his chest, undisturbed and visible, not as a statement, but as a truth. It hadn't moved. He hadn't moved, but everyone around him had. Carla stood in the galley, arms crossed, jaw tight. She was no longer just irritated, she was challenged. Her authority had been quietly questioned in front of the very passengers whose respect she was trained to command. She could feel the judgment pressing in from multiple directions, not only from Keanu, but from her own team, and possibly herself. Her fingers tapped against the tablet clipped to her tray cart. The uniform she wore suddenly felt heavier than usual, tighter around the collar. She took a deep breath, then turned sharply. "Nicole, I need you up front with me." The younger attendant blinked, unsure. "Is everything all right?" Carla gave a tight smile that wasn't really a smile. "We have a situation I'd prefer to handle with protocol. Passenger 2A is refusing to comply with the direct request. I'm escalating." Nicole looked hesitant. "Is it about the necklace?" Carla didn't answer directly. "It's about setting a precedent." Nicole followed reluctantly. Back at Keanu's row, several passengers pretended to mind their own business, eyes on books or screens, but attention elsewhere. One man near the bulkhead continued to record casually with his phone resting on the armrest, angled just enough to capture the seat across the aisle. Carla returned to Keanu's side, her stance more rigid than before. Nicole stood just behind her, not speaking, just watching. "Mr. Reeves," Carla said, louder this time, using his full name now that she'd finally recognized who he was. "I'm notifying the captain. If you continue to disregard cabin expectations, we will have to take further measures, possibly even involve airport security upon landing." Keanu slowly turned his gaze to her, unbothered. For wearing a necklace? Carla flushed. For refusing a crew member's instruction during an active flight. The words sounded official, rehearsed, but they landed like a lie in a quiet room. More passengers were visibly listening now. There was no scene, no shouting, just the unmistakable sense of a confrontation deepening and the possibility that something important was at stake. Nicole spoke gently. Maybe we should talk to the captain together before it goes that far. Carla shot her a look, sharp, disapproving. But it was too late. The moment had shifted. Carla had tried to wield authority, but what she'd revealed instead was control slipping. The cockpit door opened 5 minutes later. Out stepped Captain Morales, composed, mid-50s, face weathered but kind, the kind of man whose calm you could feel before he even spoke. He walked the aisle with purpose, but not haste. When he reached the galley, Carla stepped forward, speaking quickly. "Sir, we have a passenger refusing to comply with basic decorum. I've asked him multiple times to conceal a religious item that could disturb the cabin atmosphere. He declined. He's escalated it." Morales listened without interrupting, then turned to Nicole. "And what's your perspective?" Nicole hesitated. "He's quiet, respectful. He didn't escalate anything. He just didn't want to hide his necklace." Morales nodded, then stepped into the aisle. All eyes followed him. He approached Keanu calmly, hands behind his back like a professor preparing to speak to a thoughtful student. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Captain Morales. I understand there's been some disagreement regarding a policy. I want to ensure the well-being of everyone on board, crew and passengers included. May I ask for your version?" Keanu looked up, expression still composed, voice steady. "Your attendant asked me to conceal this." He touched the crucifix lightly, saying it might make others uncomfortable. I said no. A pause. "I told her this necklace has been part of my life for years, that it's not a symbol of ideology but of survival, of faith that held me together when nothing else did. I don't wear it to provoke. I wear it because it reminds me I'm still here." The cabin had gone so still, you could hear the distant click of a seatbelt buckle 3 rows away. Captain Morales listened, and when Keanu finished, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked back at Carla. His voice was low but firm. "Did he say anything disrespectful?" Carla opened her mouth, but words didn't come. He turned to Nicole again. "Anything aggressive?" Nicole shook her head. "No, sir." Captain Morales exhaled, the weight of leadership settling into his next words. The cabin lights had dimmed, but for Carla, there was no rest. She stood at the back of the aircraft, hidden behind the galley curtain, phone vibrating non-stop in her pocket. She hadn't opened it in the last 10 minutes. She didn't need to. She already knew. The video had gone viral. Her face, her voice, her words. The way she told Keanu Reeves to hide his crucifix. All of it was online now, being dissected by strangers around the world. Her chest tightened, not with panic, with something deeper. Shame, but not because of the backlash. Because now she saw it too. The moment replayed in her mind, not from her perspective, but from everyone else's. From Nicole's, from the passengers, from Keanu's. She hadn't been neutral. She hadn't been fair. She had judged him, quietly, politely, professionally, and that made it worse. A memory surfaced, her grandmother's voice soft and worn. "Kindness isn't what you say, it's what you choose not to hide." Carla had spent her whole life hiding. Behind policies, behind protocol, behind control. Now, there was nowhere to hide. From the cockpit came Captain Morales' voice over the intercom. "This airline is committed to respect, inclusivity, and the freedom to express one's faith without fear or shame." It was subtle but clear. Everyone knew what it meant. Keanu sat quietly in seat 2A. Still, composed, the crucifix still visible. He hadn't gloated, he hadn't retaliated, and somehow, that hurt more than if he had. Carla wiped under her eyes and took a shaky breath. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew she had to face it. She stepped out of the galley. The walk to the front felt longer than usual. Aisle lights reflected off polished seats and curious eyes. As she approached Keanu's row, the cabin fell into silence. He looked at her, calm as ever. She stopped in front of him. The words didn't come, and so she let her body speak. Carla slowly lowered herself to her knees, Gasps broke the silence. "I was wrong," she said softly. Her voice trembled. "I told myself I was protecting the cabin, that I was being professional, but I was just protecting my own discomfort." Tears welled in her eyes. "I've hidden behind neutrality my whole life. I thought it made me strong, but it just made me blind." She looked up at him. "I'm sorry." Keanu didn't speak for a moment. Then gently he stood and reached out his hand. She took it. He helped her up with quiet grace. The applause faded. The moment lingered. Carla remained standing in front of Keanu, still shaken, but different now. Open in a way she hadn't been since she first put on the uniform. She felt raw, seen, yet strangely lighter. Keanu was still holding her hand. Not to make a point, just to offer presence. Carla whispered almost to herself, "I don't know how to undo what I did." Keanu looked at her with kindness. "You don't need to undo it." He released her hand gently. "You faced it. That's more than most ever do." She blinked. The cabin was quiet, still watching. But now, no one looked like they were judging her. They looked moved. Keanu gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit, if you want." Carla nodded, sat for a moment, her posture no longer stiff, no longer performing. "I used to believe in something," she said softly. "Before this job, before rules and scripts and fear." Keanu Reeves chooses grace over conflict. Quiet faith, loud truth. Flight attendant apologizes midair, and the world watches. But Carla didn't care about the articles, because something else had changed, inside her. 2 weeks later. A soft, natural light streamed through the window of a modest apartment. Carla sat in front of her phone, recording a video. No makeup, no uniform, just her and a plain t-shirt. In her hand, she held the small silver crucifix Keanu had given her after the flight, the one he'd worn during it all. She looked into the lens. "I spent years believing professionalism meant hiding who I was." She looked down at the crucifix. "But this reminded me what it means to be human." She smiled. "Today I don't hide anymore," she paused. "Thank you, Keanu." She ended the recording, and for the first time in a long time she felt whole. The camera stopped recording. She sat there in silence, still holding the cross, not as a symbol of religion, but as a reminder of courage, of grace, of the power of choosing kindness